This is Bandit, the Atari 8-bit podcast.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kay Savitz. Jeffrey Sarnoff started at Atari in the home computer division in 1981 as a software architect, where he worked on a 3D graphics library. The next year, he moved to Atari's Research Group under Alan Kay, where he worked on a holographic animation system and a four-dimensional strategy game. This interview took place on August 25th, 2021.
My interest in computers began in high school. I went to the Horace Mann School in Riverdale, New York, and at the time, computing for kids in high school was very new. I mean, there was a class, and to do the work, we hooked up via terminal to Dartmouth's computer and did the work that way. So I think I was in ninth grade when I took that first class. After that, though, we were told that NYU physics department had excess computer capacity and was willing to have enterprising high school students come in and use it, and I asked to be one of them. And that's when I wrote my first real program, which was a program that did some work with phonetics to deal with speech. And that I thought that was terrific. For those who may be unfamiliar with early forms of storage, when I went to college at Stanford, I took the program with me on punched tape. At Stanford, they were very interested and quite insistent on my taking the beginning computing course, and I was somewhat philosophically opposed because I already knew how. Anyway, after a lot of rigmarole, I ended up getting the key to a research lab on Stanford campus that was run by Pat Suppies, the famous logician. And there they had a lot of custom computer equipment. They were the place that had designed the telephone encryption hardware for President Kennedy. And that was great because he gave me a key and said, go for it, have fun, which I did. Also attending Bennington College, where as a student I taught the first computer class they had there. And after that, through an internship at Merrill Lynch, I got a job writing the Dow Jones Portfolio Management System, which was a big deal to do on chiclet keyboards. When that came to an end, I applied to Atari. And fortunately, they hired me into the home computer division.
Mm-hmm. This was 1981, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And at the time, the home computer division was completely new. Literally, I was living in New York before I moved to California, and I had the first Atari home computer east of the Rockies, and had the fun of presenting that to the press here. At any rate, I moved out to California to be part of the home computer division, and there were, I don't know, maybe 10 people doing programming. I mean, it was really little at the time that I joined.
What were you hired to do? What was your title?
I was hired to be one of the software architects for this new box, there wasn't any. We had the machine, we had some tools, but there were no programs for it yet. I mean, other than tooling. And so I wasn't hired. I was hired because I knew from my prior work I was skilled with 6502 assembler programming.
Mm-hmm.
And as time went by, I got interested in 3D graphics of all sorts, 3D graphics particularly, and 3D animation, which they wanted very much to convert some of the computer games to programs for the home computer.
Some of the arcade games?
Yeah, arcade games, yes, and also the game machine,
mm-hmm.
sort of 2.5D stuff.
Oh, sure. So what did they want you to do at first? I mean, do you remember like what one of your early assignments was?
I honestly don't remember sort of which came first. I do remember that most of my time in the home computer division ended up going towards experimenting with and then developing a library for doing 3D graphics on the home computer. And it wasn't a product, it was to be, it was a library for other people to use.
Sure.
One of the people that there at the home computer division who was a great friend and a stellar talent, Joe Miller, died way too soon. I wanted to mention his name for the record.
All right.
And so while I was doing that, we worked very hard, like well into the night, and for weeks and months on end. And eventually that took its toll on me. And so I felt for my own health I needed to take a break, and did. While I was, I should, let me back up a minute. While I was at the home computer division, Atari hired Alan Kay to create and run a long-term research group.
Mm-hmm.
And while I was, I had met him and spoken with him a number of times. And while I was on break, I called him and I was very frank. I said, Alan, I'm not going to go back to doing that again. If you would have me, I'd love to be part of the research group. And he was wonderful. I said, take your time, when you're feeling better, you have a place here. And that's what happened. That's how I got involved with Atari Research.
So you burnt out on working on the 3D stuff?
I just became ill.
Mm-hmm.
Burning out was, I would have kept going, but the body said no.
Right.
And I just, it was very clear that that was just not a smart way to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Because make no mistake, being involved with Alan Kay was much more exciting also, but that was not the basis of my decision. It was really health-related.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to tell me about your friend Joe Miller? I haven't heard that name before.
Joe Miller is the man who created the first computer system to be sold at retail. You might have thought it was some other person, but no, his was really the first. He was, living in Ohio, and put a little group together, and they made the box. As I recall, it was sold at Sears, but I could be mistaken. This sort of captures Joe, or my relationship with Joe. One night we were both working very late, and before it got too late, I was getting hungry. He was getting hungry and said something about going to dinner, and I asked him if he'd like some company, and he said, "No, I'd really prefer to eat alone," in a warm and sarcastic tone. And that was kind of the beginning of our friendship. He was also the guy that first showed me how to use a logic analyzer to debug one of the Atari hard disks. There was an insidious bug in the low-level disk programming that one night we took on and found. So, he was a very good man, gone too soon.
Thank you for sharing that. The computer I believe you're thinking of is the Cybervision 2000, which was sold at Montgomery Ward.
Montgomery Ward.
Yeah.
Thank you for the correction. Yep, that's the one. Well, shall I get into Atari Research?
Yes, please.
Sure, you're aware. One of the ways they got Alan Kay to come and do this was offering him an extraordinary budget, so to develop the research groups, hire who he wanted to hire, and give them whatever resources he felt appropriate. And at the time, Atari was making a great deal of money. So, and they funneled a bunch of it into long-term research. Our basic marching orders were nothing that can be realized in fewer than 15 years. Mm-hmm. The environment was collegial in the best sense of the word. And the people were each in their own way quite brilliant, and everybody was supportive of everyone else, the way that I was in Atari Systems Research in Sunnyvale, and there were a number of other research groups. For us, it was each person had their own particular project or projects that was theirs, that they had sort of suggested would be good, and
Sure.
Generally, got approval, and then whatever assets they needed to pursue it were obtained. And so, while there wasn't, I didn't work with anybody on a day-to-day basis on a particular project, although there were some overarching projects that we all contributed to, the most important of which was what would a digital encyclopedia be in its best incarnation. That was actually Encyclopedia Britannica was very interested in that. Mm-hmm. But we all would offer insight, advice, response when asked to each other's projects or development, contributing in whatever way we might, from perspective or experience or just insight. And that made for a warm and very comfortable place to work.
Nice. So what was your main project or focus at research?
I had two. The first was a four-dimensional chess-like game where the fourth dimension was color. And the other was I designed a real-time digital holographic animation system. This is before there were any, and it required just an unbelievable amount of state-of-the-art, supercomputing and frame buffer stuff. It was validated. One of the research group on the East Coast had an ex-Princeton fusion guy, and he was the one, because this involves stuff about wavelengths and all, that ended up reviewing the design and said, yeah, this would actually work, which was pretty fabulous, but it was, out of sight expensive. And so I asked, after I had the whole design done and sort of blessed by him, I asked the lawyers at Atari, one in particular, Skip, if they would help me patent this, because it would be useful, I thought, eventually. And unfortunately, it was explained to me that they had, a couple of years prior, bought this very large package of holographic patents and had not seen any return from them at all. So we're disinclined to do that. There we have one of my, should have been a patent, but wasn't.
So was this project entirely theoretical, or did you start building anything?
Well, it was, I developed a theory, then went through the math, then identified, that the hardware existed which could handle the processing required, and designed the software flow, rather didn't code it, priced out the system, did all that. But that's as far as it went.
So, real-time digital holographic animation system. So, had it been built, what would it have been? What did that mean?
So there's a lot of this around now, where you basically use digital technology and optical fiddling to create wavefronts, just as one would see through a static hologram. So if you look at a static hologram, it's an image in 3 dimensions to the visual perception, and you can examine it that way. And then if you have a rapid succession of those, you can see your 3-dimensional horse galloping, or your 3-dimensional avataring, right? If just like a television works in 2D or a movie, but in 3D. However, in 3D, there's a lot more information. So dealing with, for example, as I recall, it was a long time ago, but as I recall, one of the things that I did was to pre-encode changes when that was more efficient than full images.
Okay.
But that could be wrong, because I've read a lot of stuff since then.
So like encoding the deltas rather than the full image every time.
Yeah. What in at that time, the best that I could do is come up with a sequence of a 3D animated sequence, and then have it sort of pre-processed to develop the waveform information and all that, and then have it displayed, imaged in real time. So much like cartoons have cell animation drawn, and then they show the cells in sequence, rather than in real like now, if you go to a website and look at a piece of furniture and can twirl it in 3 dimensions, it's a little, there wasn't that kind of flexibility, or in games when you're moving around in games, there's
Sure.
a lot more variability that's supported. But it was cool, not in the least because of its many millions of dollars in hardware that would have been required. So there was that. I want to make a point of acknowledging the women there who helped me, and maybe on occasion I helped. They were really spectacular, and in alphabetical order: Susan Brennan, Brenda Laurel, Anne Marion, and Margaret Minsky, who worked on the East Coast, really made it easier to do better work.
Great. A couple of those names I haven't heard before, Susan Brennan and Margaret Minsky. I will look them up.
I also want to acknowledge Rebecca Allen, who was also there and was and is extremely talented with imagery and animation, Emmy Award-winning visual artist and game designer.
It seems like there were a lot of women in Atari Research relative to other departments, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. In the home computer division, I'm not sure there were any when I was there. Certainly not when I was hired, who were programming or doing tech stuff. Yes, absolutely. And it was one of Alan Kay's, natural good moves. It was intentional, and it made a huge difference. Certainly made ever since when I'm asked for an opinion about technology and gender. I say, hey, I can only speak for myself, but my work has always been better with the input and assistance of women and men alike, and it has.
Mm-hmm.
It's an important part of the history. I'm glad that you mentioned that.
You mentioned a 4D-like chess game, which
yes,
I would like to know more about. Number one, my first thought is that sounds like fun with the color, and second of all, that doesn't sound like something that is would have been 15 years out. That seems
well. 4D is 4D. 3D was very hard at the time, so it was. But your point is well taken. Part of it was to explore the intersection of interface and color, right? In a environment where intelligence or creative gameplay mattered. So the goal wasn't the game. The goal was what to learn in pursuing the game. What was learned in pursuing the game. At any rate, it was chess-like in terms of pieces. The moves were a little different, and there were 4 possible color player things, and then different colors, would interact rather than just piece takes piece kind of stuff. There was another layer of gameplay that was how the colors would interact.
So was this game fully designed? Did programming start on it?
Yeah, I actually had it made up. We made up the boards with different colors, plexiglass, and I painted the piece myself. There were rules, and it existed. Oh, I will tell you, this is one of my best stories, so maybe it should be the last one. I was working on this, and everybody at the research group knew I was working on this, and so everybody in the research group knew that I was working on this, and they assumed I was a chess savant. I was not, and I, never claimed to be. One of the people had a friend who came to stay who happened to be a grandmaster, and they said, "Oh, Jeffrey, this guy is coming. You got to play. It'll be so good." And I was quite upfront about the fact that I wasn't particularly good at chess, but nobody believed me. So there was this, gathering, and there he was, and they set up a chess set, and it's like, okay, play. And so I thought, sure, I don't really have nobody believes me. I'll play, and we started playing, and with each move I made, the grandmaster would. That's an unusual variation of the Nimzo Indian, but each and every move he explained, said what it was and what the variant was and how intriguing it might be, and I was, really, and so this went on for a short while, and then he just crushed me, of course.
Sure.
I like that. It was a lot of fun, even though it was somewhat humbling.
Was this game was a physical game or a computer game?
Yeah, no, it was physical. It was. I made it physical to kind of work out the details, right? Because it's easier for me when I'm holding stuff or imagining that I'm holding stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted it to be. I came from the home computer division. I knew how to make games on the computer. But having the ability, I mean, it wasn't just one board. There were multiple boards. Having the ability to walk around it and, really play with the game mattered to me. So, as I say, because it was not about the game as much as about what I might learn in pursuing the game, I did not code it, but that was not the point. I presented it as a physical game.
Sure. Is there any chance that the rules for this still exist somewhere?
No, I don't believe they do. There's a lot of my early work that I would very much like to have on file, but just don't.
I understand. It happens a lot. So you were there in research from 82 to 84, I believe. Is that about right?
Yeah, sounds about right.
I assume that you were just let go when Trammell took over and let everybody go. Is that right?
No, actually, I haven't really said enough about Alan Kay. He is far and away the best boss and the most intelligent leader I have ever worked with. And kind and caring beyond all need for the people where I was working when it became clear that things were changing.
Mm-hmm.
He took each of us aside and talked with us about what we might want to do and did what he could to help make that happen before the things got really bad.
How kind.
Yeah, it's really, really good of him. It was a unique and wonderful time.
So how did your time there come to an end?
to me, Jeffrey, I just got a memo saying that we should consider reusing paper clips. I think it's time to go. So I left. Thanks, Kay. I really appreciate the chance to talk about all this.
I appreciate hearing from you. These are amazing stories, and you're talking about some projects that I have not heard about before.
Well, it's been enjoyable for my part, and I think it's great to have the record that you're developing exist.
What do you do these days?
These days, I'm very involved with a computer language called Julia, which goes very fast and is used for, well, it was used in part to get one of the vaccines test and acceptance process done quickly. It was used in the latest map of the universe, and it's also very beautiful to program in. It's intuitive. It doesn't take long to understand how to use it, and in using it, it helps one develop things elegantly just by its design and some principles that we have found over some short time. So I was involved with it when it was very young and continue to be. It's a good thing. The language is Julia.
I've heard of it. I've heard of it. I don't really know anything about it. Is it a language for mere mortals? I mean, like.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. It in most people's experience who are coming from, like a large C++ or Fortran project, you get your work to where you like it, how it's working, to where you like it in about a third the time. And it does strive to use names that mean what they say, and its structure is quite direct. And I mean, when in the earlier days of the language, when we would ask people what brought you to Julia, very common response was, I just couldn't take the pain anymore. And it's a welcoming way to develop. I would not have stayed with it this long if it were not, and I've written a lot of stuff in it, if it were not more pleasurable or less taxing to work with than alternatives.
If you could send a message to the people who are still using their Atari computers today, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
I would tell them the 6502 rocks.
I think they already know that. Awesome. Cool. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. I appreciate your time.
All right. Bye-bye, Kay.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute, make a tax-deductible contribution to the Internet Archive, a nonprofit digital library that has done incredible things to preserve computer history. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate. Thanks.